Picture this. It's a cold January night in 1935, and 2,500 people are cramming into the grand ballroom of the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City. They're not there for a fashion show or to see a movie star. They're there because of a simple newspaper advertisement that promised to teach them something their expensive educations had never covered: how to deal with people. This is the world that Dale Carnegie stepped into, a world hungry for human connection in the midst of the Great Depression. And what he discovered changed millions of lives forever. Let me tell you Carnegie's story because it's really the story of all of us. He grew up dirt poor on a Missouri farm, so poor that he had to ride his horse 3 miles to college every day because he couldn't afford the $1 for room and board in town. Every morning at 3 o'clock, his alarm would ring, and he'd crawl out of bed to bring newborn piglets in from the cold so they wouldn't freeze to death. He was ashamed of his too short trousers and his too tight coat. He felt invisible, insignificant, lost. But Dale Carnegie discovered something that transformed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. He discovered that success isn't about how smart you are or how much you know. It's about how you make other people feel. Part 1. The Foundation: Understanding Human Nature. Now, let me share with you a story that Carnegie loved to tell because it cuts right to the heart of everything. On May 7, 1931, New York City witnessed one of the most dramatic manhunts in its history. A young man named Two-Gun Crawley was trapped in his girlfriend's apartment, surrounded by 150 policemen. Machine guns rattled, tear gas filled the air, and 10,000 people gathered to watch the spectacle. When they finally captured Crawley, the police found a letter he'd written while bullets were flying around him. Blood from his wounds stained the paper as he wrote these words: "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." Think about that for a moment. Here was a man who had just killed a policeman in cold blood, and yet he saw himself as a victim, as someone with a kind heart who wouldn't hurt anyone. Carnegie tells us that Al Capone said almost the same thing. Dutch Schultz believed he was a public benefactor. The warden at Sing Sing prison told Carnegie that few criminals see themselves as bad people. They rationalize, they justify, they explain why they had to do what they did. And here's the profound truth that Carnegie wants us to understand. If cold-blooded killers don't blame themselves for their actions, what about the people we deal with every day? Your coworker who made a mistake, your teenager who left their room messy, your spouse who forgot an important date. They don't think they're wrong either. They have reasons, explanations, justifications. This leads us to Carnegie's first fundamental principle, and it's so important that if you only remember one thing from this entire book, let it be this: don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Let me tell you why this is so powerful. When you criticize someone, you're not changing them, you're putting them on the defensive. You're wounding their precious pride and creating resentment. B.F. Skinner, the famous psychologist, proved through countless experiments that an animal rewarded for good behavior learns far more effectively than one punished for bad behavior. The same is true for human beings. Carnegie shares a beautiful story about Benjamin Franklin to illustrate this point. When Franklin was young, he was argumentative and opinionated. He loved to prove people wrong. Then one day, an old Quaker friend took him aside and gave him some hard truth. "Ben, you're impossible. Your opinions slap everyone who disagrees with you. Nobody wants to be around you. You know so much that no man can tell you anything." Franklin was wise enough to take this to heart. He made it a rule to never directly contradict anyone. He gave up words like certainly and undoubtedly. Instead, he'd say, "I conceive," or "it appears to me." When someone said something he thought was wrong, he wouldn't jump in with corrections. He'd acknowledge where they might be right, then gently suggest a different perspective. And you know what happened? Franklin became one of the most influential men of his time. He became an ambassador, a founding father, a man whose wisdom shaped a nation. All because he stopped criticizing and started understanding. But Carnegie doesn't just want us to stop criticizing. He wants us to do something more powerful. His second principle is give honest and sincere appreciation. Think about the deepest craving of human nature. It's not for food or shelter or even love in the romantic sense. It's for importance. We all want to feel that we matter, that we have value, that our existence makes a difference. William James, the great psychologist, said that the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. Carnegie tells the story of Charles Schwab, who was paid over $1 million a year back when that was an astronomical sum. Why? Not because he knew more about steel than everyone else. Schwab himself admitted he had men working for him who knew far more. He was paid that salary because of his ability to deal with people. And here's what Schwab said was his greatest asset. I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people the greatest asset I possess. And the way to develop the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. Schwab never criticized anyone. He believed in giving people incentive to work. He was hearty in his approbation and lavish in his praise. Now, Carnegie is very clear about something here. He's not talking about flattery. Flattery is insincere, selfish, and shallow. It's telling people what they want to hear to get something from them. Real appreciation is different. It's noticing the genuine good in someone and expressing it honestly. Let me share a simple example. There was a man who worked as a postal clerk. Every day he weighed envelopes, handed out stamps, made change, the same monotonous tasks over and over. One day, Carnegie went to mail a letter and noticed something. The clerk had beautiful hair, so he said sincerely, "I wish I had your head of hair." The clerk's entire face lit up. He looked up, smiled, and they had a pleasant conversation. Carnegie knew that clerk probably went home that day walking on air, telling his wife about the compliment, looking in the mirror with new eyes. What did it cost? Nothing. What did it give? Everything. That moment of recognition, of being seen, of being appreciated as a human being rather than just a cog in a machine. This brings us to the third fundamental principle. Arouse in the other person an eager want. Carnegie shares a story about fishing to explain this. He loved strawberries and cream, but when he went fishing, he didn't bait his hook with strawberries and cream, he used worms, because that's what fish want. Why don't we use the same common sense when dealing with people? There's a wonderful story in the book about a father whose young son refused to eat properly. The parents tried everything, scolding, explaining how important it was, telling the boy to eat for his health. Nothing worked. Then the father got smart. He thought about what the boy actually wanted. Down the street lived a bully who would pull the boy off his tricycle and ride it himself. The boy hated this. He wanted revenge. He wanted to be strong enough to fight back. So the father said to him, "You know, if you eat the things your mother wants you to eat, you'll grow bigger and stronger. Someday you'll be able to wallop that bully." Suddenly, eating vegetables wasn't a chore. It was the path to victory. The boy would eat anything to become strong enough to defend himself. The father didn't change what he wanted. He just connected it to what his son wanted. That's the secret. It's not manipulation. It's understanding that people are motivated by their own desires, not ours. Part 2. Making people like you. Now, let me tell you about a dog named Tippy. When Carnegie was 5 years old, his father bought him this little yellow-haired pup for 50 cents. Every afternoon at 4:30, Tippy would sit in the front yard watching the path. The moment he heard Carnegie's voice or saw him coming home from school, that dog would race up the hill like a shot, leaping with joy, barking with pure ecstasy. Carnegie never forgot Tippy. And years later, he realized that Tippy had taught him one of the most important lessons about human relations. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. This is Carnegie's first principle for making people like you. Become genuinely interested in other people. Think about how backwards we usually do this. We try to impress people with our accomplishments, our knowledge, our possessions. We talk about ourselves, our problems, our opinions. But the truth is, nobody cares about us as much as they care about themselves. That's not cynical. That's just human nature. The New York Telephone Company did a study of telephone conversations and discovered the word used most frequently. Can you guess what it was? I. People said I 3,900 times in just 500 conversations. Carnegie tells a story about attending a dinner party where he met a botanist. Carnegie knew nothing about botany, but he was fascinated. He asked questions, listened intently, and let the botanist talk about his work for hours. At the end of the evening, the botanist told the host that Carnegie was a most interesting conversationalist. But Carnegie had hardly said anything. He had simply been genuinely interested and listened. This leads beautifully into another principle: smile. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds simplistic, but stay with me because there's profound wisdom here. A smile says, "I like you. You make me happy. I'm glad to see you." It costs nothing, but creates so much. It enriches those who receive it without impoverishing those who give. Carnegie shares the story of William Steinhardt, a stockbroker who was one of the worst grouches who ever walked down Broadway. He rarely smiled at his wife or said more than a few words to her in the morning. But then he decided to try an experiment. For 1 week, he would smile at everyone he met. The next morning, he looked at himself in the mirror and said, "Bill, you're going to wipe that scowl off your face today." He smiled at his wife at breakfast. She was shocked, bewildered, but he kept it up. He smiled at the elevator operator, the doorman, the cashier in the subway, the people at work. Within 2 months, his entire life had changed. His wife was happier, his colleagues were friendlier, he was making more money, all because of a smile. The third principle for making people like you is one that seems so simple, yet most of us violate it constantly. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Jim Farley, who became Postmaster General of the United States, could call 50,000 people by their first names. That ability helped put Franklin D. Roosevelt in the White House. Farley made it a practice to learn people's names, remember details about their families, their interests, their concerns. When he traveled across the country, he would write down the names of everyone he met and then send them personal letters signed Jim. Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, understood this too. When he wanted to sell steel rails to the Pennsylvania Railroad, he built a huge steel mill in Pittsburgh and called it the Edgar Thomson Steel Works, naming it after the railroad's president. When the Pennsylvania Railroad needed steel rails, where do you think they bought them? Carnegie tells another beautiful story about remembering names. There was a mechanic named Nicodemus Papadopoulos. Most people just called him Nick because his full name was difficult to pronounce, but one sales representative made the effort to learn his full name and say it correctly. The first time he greeted him, "Good afternoon, Mr. Nicodemus Papadopoulos," the man was shocked. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He said, "In all the 15 years I've been in this country, nobody has ever made the effort to call me by my right name." From that moment on, that sales representative had a loyal friend and customer. The fourth principle is, be a good listener and encourage others to talk about themselves. This is harder than it sounds. Most of us are so eager to talk, to share our opinions, to tell our stories, that we forget to listen. But think about this. If you want to be interesting, be interested. If you want people to enjoy talking to you, let them talk about themselves. Carnegie shares a story about a woman who came to a bridge party. He didn't play bridge, and she didn't either. When Carnegie mentioned that he had traveled extensively while managing Lowell Thomas's tours, she said, "Oh, Mr. Carnegie, I do want you to tell me about all the wonderful places you've visited." But instead of launching into his travel stories, Carnegie asked her about her recent trip to Africa. For 45 minutes, she talked about her adventures. She never asked where he had been. She didn't want to hear him talk. She wanted an interested listener who would let her expand her ego and tell about her experiences. Later that evening, she told the host that Carnegie was the most interesting conversationalist she'd ever met. But Carnegie had barely said anything. He had simply listened. The fifth principle is talk in terms of the other person's interests. Theodore Roosevelt understood this brilliantly. Whenever he expected a visitor, he would stay up late the night before reading about subjects he knew his guest was particularly interested in. Whether it was a cowboy, a politician, or a diplomat, Roosevelt knew what to talk about. That's part of what made him such a beloved leader. The final principle for making people like you is make the other person feel important, and do it sincerely. This is the golden rule applied to human relations. John Dewey said that the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important. We all crave recognition, appreciation, a sense that our lives matter. Carnegie tells a story about a postal clerk standing at a counter. Most customers barely acknowledged him. But one day, a man came in and, while waiting, looked around and said, "I certainly wish I had a job where I could work in such a beautiful building." The clerk's face lit up. He straightened up, smiled, and they had a wonderful conversation. That simple recognition of his worth transformed the interaction. The key word here is sincerely. You can't fake this. People can sense insincerity a mile away. But when you genuinely notice something good about someone, when you authentically appreciate their contribution, when you make them feel seen and valued, you create a bond that nothing else can match. Part 3. Winning people to your way of thinking. Now we come to perhaps the most challenging part of human relations. What do you do when you disagree with someone? When you need to change their mind or win them over to your perspective? Let me start with a story that Carnegie loved to tell. He was at a banquet in London, sitting next to a man who told a humorous story that included a quotation. The man said the quote was from the Bible. Carnegie knew it was from Shakespeare. He knew it absolutely. So, feeling superior and wanting to show his knowledge, he corrected the man. "No," Carnegie said, "that's from Shakespeare." The man stuck to his guns. It went back and forth. Finally, Carnegie's friend, Frank Gammond, who was sitting next to him, kicked him under the table and said quietly, "Dale, you are wrong. The gentleman is right. It is from the Bible." On the way home that night, Carnegie asked Gammond, "Frank, you knew that quotation was from Shakespeare? It's from Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 2. "Yes, of course," Gammond replied, "but we were guests at a festive occasion, my dear Dale. Why prove to a man he's wrong? Is that going to make him like you? Why not let him save face? Always avoid the acute angle." That lesson changed Carnegie's life, and it brings us to the first principle of winning people to your way of thinking. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. This sounds counterintuitive. We're taught that arguments can be won, that logic and facts will prevail. But Carnegie learned from bitter experience that you can't win an argument, because if you lose it, you lose it, and if you win it, you still lose it. Why? Because even if you prove the other person wrong, you've made them feel inferior. You've wounded their pride. They'll resent you. As the old saying goes, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Carnegie tells the story of a sales representative named Patrick O'Hare who used to argue with customers. When a customer criticized the trucks he was selling, O'Hare would jump in and defend them aggressively. He won a lot of arguments, but he didn't sell many trucks. Then he learned a different approach. When a customer said, "Your trucks are no good," O'Hare would say, "You're right. That other brand you're considering is excellent. If you buy that truck, you'll never make a mistake." The customer would be speechless. There was no room for argument. And then O'Hare would calmly begin pointing out the advantages of his trucks. His sales skyrocketed. The second principle is, show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, "You're wrong." Think about what happens when you tell someone they're wrong. Every fiber of their being resists. It's not the ideas themselves that are dear to us, it's our self-esteem. When you attack someone's opinion, you're attacking their sense of self. They'll dig in deeper, find more reasons to justify their position, fight harder to maintain their stance. Galileo understood this 500 years ago when he said, "You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself." So instead of saying, "You're wrong," try saying, "I may be wrong. I frequently am. Let's examine the facts together." There's magic in those words. Nobody can object to them. They lower defenses, create openness, Invite collaboration rather than confrontation. The third principle might be the hardest to follow, but it's incredibly powerful. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Carnegie tells a wonderful story about walking his dog Rex in a park. Dogs were supposed to be on a leash and muzzled, but Carnegie often let Rex run free. One day, a mounted policeman caught him. The officer said sternly, "Don't you know it's against the law to let that dog run loose? I'm going to let you off this time, but if I catch you again, you'll have to tell it to the judge." A few days later, Carnegie and Rex came over a hill, and there was the same policeman. Before the officer could say anything, Carnegie called out, "Officer, you've caught me red-handed. I'm guilty. I have no alibis, no excuses. You warned me last week, and here I am doing it again." The policeman's entire demeanor changed. "Well," he said gently, "I know it's a temptation to let a little dog like that run free when nobody's around. Just take him around the hill where I can't see him, and we'll forget all about it." By admitting his fault quickly and emphatically, Carnegie transformed a potential confrontation into a friendly exchange. The policeman, instead of exercising his authority, took the generous route because Carnegie had already beaten him to the criticism. This leads to the fourth principle: begin in a friendly way. There's an old fable about the sun and the wind having an argument about which was stronger. The wind said, "I can prove I'm stronger. See that old man down there with a coat? I bet I can get his coat off him quicker than you can." The sun went behind a cloud, and the wind blew and blew. It became almost a tornado, but the harder it blew, the tighter the old man clutched his coat. Finally, the wind gave up. Then the sun came out from behind the clouds and smiled warmly on the old man. Soon, the man was mopping his brow and took off his coat. The sun had won by being gentle and friendly. Gentleness and friendliness are always stronger than fury and force. This works in business, in family life, in every human interaction. Carnegie tells the story of John D. Rockefeller Jr. dealing with a strike at one of his Colorado mines. The situation was explosive. There had been violence, bloodshed, troops called in. Instead of coming in with threats and force, Rockefeller addressed the striking workers with incredible warmth and friendliness. He praised them for their courtesy in listening to him. He spoke of their shared interests. He made them feel respected and valued. The strike ended peacefully, and many of the strikers became loyal workers. The fifth principle is one of Carnegie's favorites. Get the other person saying yes, yes, immediately. When you start a conversation with points of agreement rather than points of disagreement, you set the psychological momentum moving in a positive direction. It's like a billiard ball. Once you set it rolling in one direction, it takes force to change its course. Carnegie tells the story of a bank teller dealing with a difficult customer. The man refused to fill out certain information on a form for opening an account. Instead of arguing or issuing ultimatums, the teller said, "You're right, this information isn't absolutely necessary. However, let me ask you this. If you had money in this bank at your death, wouldn't you want the bank to transfer it to your next of kin?" "Yes, of course," the man said. "Don't you think it would be a good idea to give us that information now so we could carry out your wishes without error or delay?" "Yes," the man said again. The man's entire attitude softened. He ended up not only providing all the information, but also opening a trust account for his mother. The sixth principle is let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Most of us, when trying to win someone over, talk too much. We explain, we argue, we present our case, but Carnegie learned that it's far more effective to ask questions and let the other person talk themselves into your position. He shares the story of a sales representative who tried for years to sell to an automobile manufacturer. When he finally got his chance to present, he lost his voice to laryngitis. He could barely whisper, so he wrote on a pad, "I've lost my voice. I'm speechless." The president of the company smiled and said, "I'll do the talking for you." And he did. He talked for over an hour, praising the salesman's products, discussing their merits, convincing himself. The salesman got the contract without saying a word, simply because he let the other person talk. The seventh principle is beautiful in its simplicity. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. We all have much more faith in ideas we discover ourselves than in ideas handed to us. Carnegie tells the story of a sales representative who was trying to sell sketches to stylists. For 3 years, he called on one particular buyer every week and was rejected every time. Then he changed his approach. Instead of showing finished sketches, he brought unfinished ones and asked, "How do you think we could finish these so you could use them?" The buyer studied them and said, "Leave them with me." 3 days later, the buyer called him back with suggestions. The sketches were finished according to the buyer's ideas. The buyer bought them all. Why? Because he felt he was creating the designs himself. The 8th principle requires empathy. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. Carnegie says that before going into any important conversation or negotiation, we should spend time thinking about the other person's perspective. What do they want? What are their concerns? What would make them happy? He tells the story of a father who wanted to take his family to visit historical sites on the East Coast, but his wife wanted to visit the Western states. Instead of arguing, he asked his daughter, who had just finished a history class, how she would like to visit the places she'd been learning about. She was thrilled. 2 days later, at dinner, his wife announced that the family vacation would be to the Eastern historical sites. She had thought about it from everyone's perspective and made the decision herself. The 9th principle is one of the most powerful. Be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. People are hungry for sympathy. When someone is upset, they don't want logic or solutions. They want to be heard and understood. Carnegie tells the story of a woman who was 6 weeks late with her car payment. She received a harsh phone call threatening repossession. Instead of getting defensive, she looked at the situation from the collector's viewpoint. She apologized sincerely for causing him trouble and acknowledged that she must be his most difficult customer. His entire tone changed. He began telling her about other difficult customers, letting off steam. Then, without her even asking, he offered to let her pay the money gradually, rather than all at once. 3 simple words can transform a conflict. I don't blame you. When you say sincerely, I don't blame you one bit for feeling as you do. If I were you, I'd feel exactly the same way. You melt resistance like spring sunshine melts ice. The 10th principle appeals to our better nature. Appeal to the nobler motives. People have 2 reasons for doing things, one that sounds good and a real one. The person knows the real reason. You don't need to emphasize it. But all of us, being idealists at heart, like to think of motives that sound good. So when you want to change someone's behavior, appeal to their nobler instincts. When newspaper photographers were taking pictures of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s children, he didn't say, "Don't publish those pictures because I don't want you to." Instead, he said, "You know how it is, boys. You've got children yourselves, and you know it's not good for youngsters to get too much publicity." He appealed to their concern for children's welfare, and it worked. The 11th principle is, dramatize your ideas. We live in an age of showmanship. Merely stating a truth isn't enough. You have to make it vivid, interesting, dramatic. Carnegie tells the story of a newspaper that was being criticized for carrying too much advertising. Instead of arguing with statistics, they took one day's content, removed all the advertisements and editorial matter, and published everything else as a book. It was 307 pages long. They had dramatically proven their point. They published an enormous amount of news and features. The final principle for winning people to your thinking is, throw down a challenge. The way to get things done is to stimulate competition, not in a sordid money-getting way, but in the desire to excel. People love games. They love challenges. They love the chance to prove their worth. Carnegie tells the story of Charles Schwab dealing with a mill that wasn't producing enough tin. Instead of threatening or scolding, he simply asked a day shift worker, "How many heats did your shift make today?" The answer was 6. Schwab chalked a big 6 on the floor and walked away. When the night shift came in and saw the 6, they asked what it meant. The day shift explained. The night shift erased the 6 and wrote a big 7. The next morning, the day shift saw the 7 and determined to beat it. They left a 10. Soon, that mill was producing more than any other in the plant. Why? because Schwab had thrown down a challenge. Part 4. Being a leader who changes people. Now we come to the most delicate aspect of human relations. How do you change people's attitudes and behavior without creating resentment? How do you lead effectively? Carnegie opens this section with a story about President Calvin Coolidge. One day, Coolidge said to his secretary, "That's a very pretty dress you're wearing this morning, and you're a very attractive young woman." She blushed in confusion. Then Coolidge said, "Now don't get stuck up. I just said that to make you feel good. From now on, I wish you would be a little more careful with your punctuation." This is Carnegie's first principle of leadership. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. It's like a dentist using Novocaine before drilling. The patient still gets the drilling, but the pain is minimized. Before you point out someone's faults or mistakes, find something genuine to praise. It opens their heart and mind. It makes them receptive rather than defensive. The second principle is subtle but powerful. Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Charles Schwab was walking through one of his steel mills when he saw employees smoking directly under a no-smoking sign. Did he point to the sign and say, "Can't you read?" No, he walked over, handed each man a cigar and said, "I'd appreciate it, boys, if you would smoke these outside." They knew he knew they'd broken a rule, but instead of feeling humiliated, they felt respected. They couldn't help but love a man like that. Carnegie also talks about the power of one simple word change. Many people give praise followed by the word "but" and then criticism. You did a great job, but everything before the "but" gets erased in the person's mind. They only hear the criticism. Change "but" to "and." You did a great job, and if you continue this effort, you'll achieve even more. Same message, but one is discouraging and the other is encouraging. The third principle shows humility. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Carnegie shares how he dealt with his young secretary. When she made a mistake, instead of jumping on her, he would say, "You've made a mistake, Josephine, but the Lord knows it's no worse than many I've made. I wasn't born with good judgment either. That comes with experience. I've done so many foolish things myself that I have very little inclination to criticize you. But don't you think it would have been better if you had done it this way?" It's much easier to listen to criticism of your faults when the person admitting they've made similar mistakes. It creates a sense of shared humanity rather than superior-inferior dynamics. The fourth principle recognizes human dignity. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Owen D. Young, a great business leader, never gave direct orders. He would say things like, "You might consider this," or "Do you think that would work?" He gave people the opportunity to do things themselves, to learn from their own mistakes, to save face, and maintain their sense of importance. Carnegie tells the story of a plant manager who needed an order completed quickly. Instead of demanding it, he called everyone together and explained the situation. Then he asked questions. "Is there anything we can do to handle this order? Can anyone think of different ways to process it? Is there any way to adjust our schedule?" The employees came up with solutions themselves and approached the job with enthusiasm. They felt ownership because they had participated in the decision. The fifth principle is crucial for maintaining relationships. Let the other person save face. When General Electric needed to remove Charles Steinmetz from heading a department, they didn't fire him or demote him. They gave him a new title, Consulting Engineer of the General Electric Company. It was work he was already doing, but now it had a prestigious title. Steinmetz was happy. The company got what it needed. Everyone saved face. Carnegie emphasizes that even if we are right and the other person is definitely wrong, we destroy ego by causing someone to lose face. As Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote, "I have no right to say or do anything that diminishes a man in his own eyes. What matters is not what I think of him, but what he thinks of himself." The sixth principle is the most transformative. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. Carnegie tells the story of a young mechanic whose work had become sloppy. Instead of threatening him or criticizing him harshly, the manager said, "Bill, you're a fine mechanic. You've been in this line of work for years and have done excellent work. We've had many compliments about you. Yet lately, the time you take has been increasing and your work hasn't been up to your old standards. Because you've been such an outstanding mechanic in the past, I felt you'd want to know I'm not happy with this situation." The mechanic hadn't realized he'd been falling down in his duties. With that reputation to live up to, he became fast and thorough again. Praise is like sunlight to the human spirit. We cannot flower and grow without it. The psychologist Jess Lair said this beautifully. Carnegie shares story after story of people whose lives were transformed by a few words of sincere praise. Enrico Caruso's first teacher told him he couldn't sing, that his voice sounded like wind in the shutters. But his mother praised him, believed in him, went barefoot to save money for his lessons. He became one of the greatest opera singers who ever lived. Charles Dickens was rejected again and again, but one editor gave him praise, printed one of his stories. That recognition changed his entire life. The seventh principle creates positive expectations. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. If you want to improve someone in a certain area, act as though that trait were already one of their outstanding characteristics. Shakespeare said, "Assume a virtue if you have it not." Carnegie tells the story of a teacher, Mrs. Hopkins, who had Tommy in her 4th grade class. Tommy was the school's worst troublemaker. His previous teacher had complained about him constantly. But on the first day of school, Mrs. Hopkins looked Tommy straight in the eyes and said, "Tommy, I understand you're a natural leader. I'm going to depend on you to help me make this class the best class in the 4th grade this year." Tommy couldn't let her down. He lived up to that reputation. He became a cooperative, helpful student. The 8th principle shows encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. Carnegie tells the story of a man taking dancing lessons. His first teacher told him he was all wrong and would have to start over from scratch. That discouraged him completely. His second teacher said his dancing was a bit old-fashioned, but the fundamentals were fine. She assured him he had a natural sense of rhythm and would have no trouble learning new steps. Even though he suspected she was exaggerating, it gave him hope and motivation. When you're helping someone improve, don't emphasize how difficult it will be. Emphasize their natural abilities, the progress they've already made, how just a little more effort will bring success. The 9th and final principle ties everything together. Make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. When Woodrow Wilson asked William Gibbs McAdoo to join his cabinet as Secretary of Treasury, he did it in such a way that McAdoo felt he was doing Wilson a favor. Wilson had a delightful way of creating that impression. Napoleon understood this principle. When he created the Legion of Honor and gave out 15,000 crosses to his soldiers, people criticized him for giving toys to war-hardened veterans. Napoleon replied, "Men are ruled by toys." He understood that people crave recognition, titles, a sense of importance. Carnegie tells the story of a woman whose lawn was being destroyed by neighborhood boys running across it. She tried criticism and threats. Nothing worked? Then she appointed the worst offender as her detective and put him in charge of keeping trespassers off her lawn. Problem solved. The boy built a bonfire in the backyard and threatened to brand anyone who stepped on the lawn. When you need to change someone's attitude or behavior, remember these guidelines. Be sincere. Know exactly what you want them to do. Be empathetic about what they really want. Consider the benefits they'll receive. Match those benefits to their wants. And when you make your request, put it in a form that conveys how they personally will benefit. I strongly encourage you to purchase How to Win Friends and Influence People for yourself. This summary only covers the highlights, but the complete book contains dozens of additional stories, deeper insights, and practical examples that will resonate with your specific life situations. Reading the full book allows you to absorb these principles at your own pace and return to them whenever you face challenges in your relationships. The wisdom in these pages has transformed millions of lives over nearly 90 years. It's an investment that will pay dividends forever. You'll find the purchase link in the description below. If this video added value to your life, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs this wisdom, and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing book summaries. Thank you for watching.